Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into what is, without a doubt, the single most profound aviation mystery of our entire lifetime. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, which was this massive Boeing 770, just seemingly vanished from the face of the Earth. Now, there's a lot of noise out there about this, but today we're going to completely bypass the wild internet theories. Instead, we're going to piece together the actual timeline of what we know for a fact, relying strictly on official safety reports and hard scientific data.
Good night, Malaysian 370. Those were the final words broadcast over the radio from the cockpit at exactly 17:19 UTC. And you know what's so chilling about that? It was a completely, utterly routine sign-off. The pilot's voice had absolutely no hint of panic, no distress, no sign of mechanical trouble whatsoever. And yet, right after this incredibly ordinary transmission, the plane just disappeared from civilian air traffic control radar.
And before we get into the heavy technical data, we have to talk about this number, 239. That is the total number of passengers and crew members who were on board that night. It's the human toll that drives this entire investigation, because to this day, their fates remain completely unknown. That's what cements this as not just some logistical puzzle, but truly one of the greatest and most heartbreaking mysteries in modern history.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the intended journey. Notice the planned route here. MH370 took off at 1642 UTC for what was supposed to be just a standard daily scheduled flight. You can see the route tracking out from Kuala Lumpur, heading northeast right over the Gulf of Thailand on its way to Beijing. Up to the specific point, everything was progressing exactly by the book.
But here is where things get wild. Look at the sheer speed at which this all unraveled. As the plane approached a navigational waypoint called Igari, Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control handed the flight over to Ho Chi Minh at 17:19 UTC. That's exactly when we got that final normal radio call. But literally within one single minute, by 17:20 UTC, the aircraft's transponder abruptly dropped off. And then a minute after that, at 17:21, the radar symbol vanished entirely. The communication systems went completely dark in a matter of seconds.
Let's actually zoom in on that waypoint, IGRE. Notice how incredibly tight this timeline is. It was just 3.2 nautical miles after passing it, right smack in the middle of that crucial handover window between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, that the secondary radar position simply vanished from the controller's screens. For civilian air traffic control, the plane literally ceased to exist. Now you might be wondering, well, how do we know the plane didn't just tragically crash into the ocean right there at Igari? And that comes down to an absolutely crucial difference between civilian and military radar. See, civilian radar relies on active signals from the aircraft's transponder, so when that got disabled, civilian ATC lost the plane. But military primary radar works differently. It actually physically bounces radio waves off objects in the sky. And the military radar actually tracked a massive physical object, the Boeing 777, executing a sharp, completely unannounced turn back over Malaysia. This military tracking data revealed what was effectively a ghost flight. They watched the radar blip turning left, flying west back over the Malacca Strait, and eventually disappearing from their screens in 1822 UTC, just past a waypoint called Mekar. And I know what you're thinking. Why on earth didn't the military scramble jets to intercept it? Well, according to the official report, based on how the aircraft was tracking and its continuous flight pattern, the military deemed it a friendly aircraft. They just didn't see it as an active threat at the time.
But here's where the investigation takes a huge turn. Even though the radar went dark, the plane wasn't actually completely silent. It continued to secretly communicate through something called SATCOM handshakes. Basically, these are automated electronic pings sent every hour between the aircraft's satellite terminal and Inmarsat's Indian Ocean region satellite. Even with the primary system shut off, this background system kept logging on. This is huge because it proved the aircraft didn't crash at Mekar. It actually continued to fly for several hours heading south.
So, investigators had a brilliant idea. By analyzing the precise fractions of a second it took for those electronic pings to travel all the way up to the satellite in space and back down, they could calculate the distance between the satellite and the plane. Now, they didn't know the exact direction, just the distance, so they had to draw these vast rings of probability around the globe. And this brings us to a really critical term, the seventh arc. This is the calculated vicinity in the remote southern Indian Ocean where the final seventh satellite handshake happened at 00:19:29 UTC. Based on the math from Boeing and Inmarsat, this seventh arc became the absolute focal point for the massive underwater search.
Which naturally leads us to the billion-dollar question, right? The one that's been debated endlessly. Was the diversion intentional? To really understand the full scope of the official report, we have to look at the human element. International investigators placed intense, impartial scrutiny on the flight crew. Specifically, they were looking very closely at the pilot in command, Sahari Shah, and his first officer, searching for literally any clue that might explain this radical deviation from the flight plan. As part of that deep dive, the Royal Malaysia Police and the FBI analyzed Captain Zahari Shah's elaborate home flight simulator, and they actually recovered 6 deleted data points from his Microsoft Flight Simulator X program. These waypoints were found hidden in an automatic backup system called a volume shadow information file, dated roughly a month before the flight. When investigators connected these coordinates, they showed a simulated flight path from Kuala Lumpur straight down into the deep southern Indian Ocean. Now, the official report lays out this forensic evidence very neutrally. They leave it as a piece of the puzzle, but they stop short of definitively declaring it absolute proof of intent.
In fact, to keep us strictly grounded in the established facts, it is absolutely vital to look at what the official Malaysian Safety Investigation Report ultimately concluded. After reviewing all the available data, they stated they found no explicit evidence of mechanical failure, no systems malfunction, and no irregular behavior from the pilots before the flight. However, they explicitly stated they could not exclude the possibility of third-party intervention. The hard truth is, without the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, the black boxes, they simply could not determine the true cause of the disappearance.
And the absence of those black boxes is exactly what drove the most extensive search operation in the history of aviation. Look at this number, 120,000. That represents the staggering scale of the effort. We're talking 120,000 square kilometers of remote, incredibly rugged Indian Ocean seafloor. It was meticulously mapped out using high-resolution sonar equipment along that seventh arc. To put that into perspective for you, they were basically searching a dark, underwater mountain range roughly the size of the entire state of Pennsylvania.
And the sheer dedication of the teams trying to find answers was immense. 1,046. That is the number of days the official multinational search operation ground on. They scoured millions of square kilometers of ocean surface and seabed. But despite these literally monumental efforts, the official search had to be suspended on January 17, 2017, without ever locating the main fuselage.
Now, while the main wreckage wasn't found in that search, pieces of debris did eventually wash up thousands of miles away, hitting the eastern shores of Africa and islands in the Indian Ocean. Based on those physical fragments and the final satellite data, the expert consensus is that the final moments of MH370 were incredibly violent. The crash impact is believed to have been highly energetic. The accepted calculation is that the aircraft simply ran out of fuel, which caused the autopilot to disengage, leading to a steep, uncontrolled spiral stall directly into the ocean. But listen, the search for answers hasn't actually stopped. It's just evolved. Today, scientists are looking at totally different kinds of data. They're analyzing underwater acoustics, specifically these things called hydroacoustic spectrograms. What they're doing is actively searching for the massive, unique pressure signals that would have been generated by a 200-ton aircraft slamming into the water near the seventh arc at high speed. It's really fascinating. Researchers are tapping into these unconventional data sources to give us new hope. They're actually using stations from the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization to meticulously scan the ocean's acoustic history. And at the exact same time, independent researchers are utilizing something called WSPR data, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. It measures disruptions in global radio waves. Think of these radio waves like invisible tripwires in the sky. When a huge plane flies through them, it leaves a distortion that can basically trace the plane's invisible wake. And crazily enough, some of this recent WSPR analysis closely aligns with the coordinates found on the pilot's home flight simulator. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought for today's explainer. Will this modern, cutting-edge technology, like hydroacoustic analysis and global radio wave tracing, finally be the key? Will it be enough to pierce the dark depths of the Indian Ocean, overcome the sheer vastness of nature, and finally solve the greatest aviation mystery of our time? It's the ultimate question, and it's one that continues to drive investigators all over the world as they tirelessly seek answers, honoring the 239 souls who remain lost.